Welcome to the Applied Neuroscience Association podcast, your gateway to lifelong learning, where neuroscience meets allied disciplines, exploring ideas to enhance lives.
Imagine growing up across multiple countries, embracing diverse cultures, yet feeling you belong everywhere and nowhere. Hi, and welcome to Third Culture Kit podcast, where we explore the unique experience, challenges, and triumph of growing up between cultures. Your host today will be me, Nicola-Jane, a cross-culture kid myself, mom Danish, dad English. I have lived in 4 countries, which means that my 3 kids are TCKs because of us. I'm so lucky to be a member of ANNA, and that's why I'm sitting here today. I'm writing a trilogy where I introduce TCK in my book too. I'm here to guide you through the fascinating stories of and insights of TCKs around the world. Each episode, we dive into diverse narratives of third culture kids, discussing everything from identity and belonging to the impact of global mobility on a TCK's life. Wherever you are TCK yourself, or a parent, or just curious about the unique lifestyle of a TCK, listen in. Last week, we had the opportunity to talk to our special guest, Maika, about the unique advantages of a TCK. Today, she will join us again, and we will talk about the challenges of a TCK. So welcome, Maika.
Hi, Nicola. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you for coming. Will you just briefly say a bit about yourself?
Yes, so my name is Maika. My mother is Japanese, my father is Danish. So I identify as Japanese-Danish mixed. But I spent most of my life, 13 years to be exact, so most of my childhood growing up in Vietnam. So because of that, I identify as third culture, and I really resonate with the experiences and the feelings that can be evoked having been a third culture kid.
Thank you. So challenges are an essential part of life, isn't it? That contributes to personal growth and resilience and overall well-being. But what happens when we put challenges into the context of a TCK? How do you see you have been challenged as a TCK, Maika?
I think in many ways, definitely some that come to mind is difficulty with relationships, sort of feeling a sense of, almost like a sense of not belonging to either countries where I'm from, and feeling a bit confused and feeling a bit unsure and about my identity, and also just a simple question of where is home, as we talked about previously. Just a simple question like that evokes so many sort of like a complicated response. So I think just like a simple question like that, and the fact that it's difficult for me to answer kind of in itself explains some of the challenges I think that many people can relate when it comes to being third culture.
Definitely. So we talked about in the other podcast, I think it was podcast 2, education. You said you had an international education?
Yes.
What does that mean?
So I attended an international school, which I think was made up of students from over 40 different nations around the globe. So it was a very big mix of students from all over. And yeah, I think that's mainly what created the international environment. and obviously the education being in English as well, which was a language upon initially starting at the school was unfamiliar to me. So in that sense, studying in a foreign language to me made it an international experience.
So did you have to change school when you were younger?
So I attended a Japanese kindergarten in Japan, and then I moved to an international school in Vietnam. So I didn't move around different schools that much. It was just sort of the natural progression of kindergarten and then starting primary school.
Because what I also hear sometimes from TCKs is that so they started in English education, then they go into the international, and maybe they go to a German school, which can be a challenge as a TCK. But you've been lucky. You've been in the same international education.
Yeah.
So if you look back in time, have you tried any like culture clashes?
I think, yeah, I definitely feel like there has been. I don't think, nothing comes to mind where it's been it's confronted me negatively. Not that I can think of right now, but I think there's inevitably culture clashes or different ways in which cultures will do something, or even just within my household as well, like being brought up with two cultures and being raised sort of in the traditional way that pertains to each culture, I think naturally caused a clash. But I think it wasn't sort of affecting me negatively. It was just something that I had to be accustomed to and sort of learn to navigate. Yeah.
Because there's a word that's said many times when we talk to TCKs as well, is the misunderstanding. Can you relate to that?
Yeah, for sure. I think that comes with feeling like, I don't necessarily feel 100% Japanese, and I don't feel 100% Danish either. So internally, I feel misunderstood whenever I visit either country or even when I try to associate myself as being or encompassing that part of me, or trying to resonate with that part of me. I think internally I feel misunderstood because I don't feel like I can fully embody one in its whole.
Yeah, that's also what I've heard from a lot of TCKs. So the misunderstanding of him. You also mentioned just when we started the podcast a bit of identity confusion sometimes.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, I think relating to what I just touched on. So I would visit Denmark every summer, and I think one way, to put it simply, I think to put sort of my experience as being third culture simply, is that whenever I would visit Denmark, I felt more Japanese, or I felt more in touch with my sort of Asian side. Whereas whenever I would travel to Japan, or even just growing up in Asia, I felt more Danish. So yeah, it was this contrast of this clash of identity that I would experience. And I think that definitely made it difficult for me to fully assimilate into the culture and fully feel like I belong in that country, or fully able to kind of embody the fact that I am from that country, or that part of me, that side of me.
So how do you go around it today as being an adult, as a TCK adult, about identity?
Yeah, I think I still very much embody an international identity. Like I find it almost difficult to fully, like, even when I say, oh, I'm Danish Japanese, I don't say that with as much confidence because, again, as I've mentioned, I don't fully feel either or. So I think the closest...
Yep. So, Maika, I'm just curious about being an adult TCK. How do you come around your identity confusing now?
I feel like I definitely still haven't overcome that. I think I still very much embody an international identity. Despite me being able to confidently say I'm Danish Japanese, I feel like I struggle to fully, like, it's not something that I'm fully secure with either, because I don't necessarily feel like I embody either part of me completely. And so I feel like navigating life, even as an adult, I feel more, I feel very international. And I think that comes with just me still living abroad, and also having friendships globally, having had an international education, even at university. So I think that part of me is very much a part of who I am, and not necessarily something to get over and overcome, but rather it's almost also propelled me to want to get more in touch with where I'm from and learn more about that side of me and get closer to that side of me, I guess.
So you say where you're from.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the passport from your parents' identity you're talking about?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely.
Because a TCK is the third culture itself, like taking your mom and dad, Japanese to Danish, and then you move out, and then you find your own way around this.
Yeah.
That's yours. Unique, special identity in it all.
Mm-hmm.
So you're also talking about this rootless, restless thing about, do you think that has something to do with identity as well?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Yeah, I think not fully feeling or having a place where I can confidently say this is where I'm from and this is my home. Not having that security in my life currently causes, I guess, some instability and restlessness for sure. Yeah, I think that is something that is a bit tricky, and I guess a challenge of being third culture.
So do you sometimes think about, where do I want to live?
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I feel like there's a part of me that wants to get closer to those parts of me as well. So closer to my Japanese side and closer to my Danish side, just so that, because as much as there's unique advantages, as we spoke about being in this ambiguous space of feeling international, and I guess what you said, this third culture that I've sort of created, as much as I'm fond of being in that space and having that identity, it still sort of makes me want to also get closer to my ties, and I guess just have some sort of stability in my life and being able to be more confident about my roots, and I think that also definitely will help me when it comes to my identity and just learning more about myself and where I truly feel a sense of belonging.
So, and we know now that you have friends and relationships all over the world. Do you think, because you also mentioned when you meet up with friends now or meeting new people, the energy you get from them and the open-minded, do you think that TCKs are just in general more open because of what they have been exposed to growing up?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, it's definitely not just a trait that has to or only can be obtained by having lived abroad. I think being open-minded is definitely something that anyone can fulfill and be at close reach to, depending on the way that they choose to educate themselves, or just, I guess it just also comes down to interest and being interested in the world around them. So I don't think it's something that only comes from having lived abroad, but I think it definitely helps, and perhaps it's accelerated from having lived abroad as well.
So do you think at TCK it's hard for them to actually maintain lasting relationships? Do you think that's harder for them?
I think it just takes more of an effort, more deliberate effort. And I think something that I've also started to realize is that a lot of the friendships that are global, as much as it's great to have friends living internationally, and I think that's something that I've come to terms with in my adult life, that the reality is that friendships are going to be dispersed, and that's something that is just the reality of growing up and adulting. But I think a challenge that comes with that is the friendships almost turns into being limited to meeting up very infrequently, and the times where you are able to meet, in those rare occasions, it almost turns into a catch up rather than deepening the friendship and talking about very mundane things. So it feels like you're forced to, the conversations are almost restricted to catching up on all that you've missed, all the years, perhaps in some cases, where you haven't seen each other in a while, rather than the focus being on sort of growing that friendship and developing it. It's almost like it's kind of stuck in the past almost. Yeah. And I feel like also I've noticed that whenever I do see friends who do live abroad, and I do get to see them, or even if I'm messaging them online, I feel like I transport myself to a time in my life in the past when I was friends with them, and I sort of embody this other version of me, and I start to, it's like I'm brought back to a time, to that point in my life where I was very close to that person, and I think it's definitely a great thing, because it's almost like you're just picking up right where you left off, so it's super seamless the way that you're able to interact with that person, and you know that bond is very strong. But at the same time, I think it comes with the challenge of not being able to feel as comfortable and as confident to be open to expressing maybe a new version of yourself, or a version of yourself that you feel like you embody now rather than the one in the past. So I think, it's like, I feel like it's almost difficult to fully be yourself in those when you're confronted in those situations.
Yeah, it really makes sense, Maika. It really does. So not having them in your everyday life is the challenge of it.
Yeah.
Not seeing you growing as a person, your identity into it.
Yeah.
Can we just pause, because I need to... So not having them in your everyday life, actually seeing that you are developing from all the things that your unique brain has experienced in life, and now you're in a different place in life, that it must also lead to a bit of stress and anxiety
Mm-hmm.
around you, the emotional phase. What do you
Yeah.
think about that?
Yeah, I definitely can relate to that. Yeah, I think it's just navigating all these different versions of me that come out depending on who I'm with. Because I think one of the biggest like negative confrontational comment that you can get, I guess this is not only limited to third culture, but a comment like, "Oh, you've changed." I think that's something that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, because change is inevitable, and you know, you're not always going to be that version of yourself when you were 16, for example. So yeah, I think despite it not like it shouldn't be a negative comment to receive, but I think inevitably it's something that almost makes you almost has this negative connotation. So I think the reason why I say that I feel like I embody a different version of myself, I feel like I'm trying to embody like what that person that I'm sat in front of will find familiar to them, like that version of me. And so I wouldn't want them to feel like I've changed or feel like I'm someone completely different. Yeah, and I think that is something that comes with navigating friendships, and perhaps the anxiety of that, because I don't want to feel like I'm being unauthentic to myself and who I am currently. But at the same time, I'm also trying to be the person that they remember me as being. And I don't want them to feel like I've, not the same, or feel like we've grown apart.
So that's trying to adapt again.
Mm-hmm.
You're sitting in front of, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which you have learned from a very early stage.
Mm-hmm.
So if we should try to sum up, Maika, sorry, what would you say the 5 most challenging things growing up as a TCK is?
I think maintaining and navigating friendships, for one. And I think feeling the emotions that come with that. So like feeling guilt if you haven't necessarily been as good at maintaining contact as you wish you'd have been. So feeling the emotions that come from that. So guilt and stress and anxiety. I think with the fact that you have this friendship that you really cherish, but obviously it can be difficult to stay in touch, and then you might start to question the nature of your relationship with them. So I think that is definitely a big one. And then, as we talked about earlier, so like feeling like an identity, loss of identity, or not feeling very secure in your identity. And yeah, I think, as we said, the restlessness and the rootlessness of frequently moving and things around you changing and people coming and going are some challenges that come to mind.
Thank you so much for that, Maika, opening up to us and all the listeners that are sitting out there. So these difficulties that you also said now can impact a TCK sense of stability and well-being, which leads me to, on the spot I'm just thinking, requiring a strong support system so you get the right coping strategies to bring with you throughout your developing years into the adult years. Wouldn't you say that?
Yes, absolutely.
So having people around you that are adults that can help you through the challenges that is being a TCK. So thank you so much, Maika, again for joining us in this podcast.
Thank you, Nicola, for having me and speaking to me about this.
Of course, hope to see you again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. It does not substitute professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult a qualified health practitioner for guidance. Opinions expressed by guests are their own and are independent of this podcast. Thank you for listening.